Welcome to Down to Earth Astrology and Primal Girl Wellness. This is Miss Jenny and I am your astrologer. This series of videos will be about synastry and also murder charts, looking at the connections between murderers and their victims, or potential murders and the victims. And understand that this currently with the Idaho 4, this is an ongoing investigation. Nothing said in this video is a confirmation of guilt or innocence on anyone's part. It is purely speculation and observation based on what we know about astrology. This may be a lengthy video, so do not be surprised if it is cut into separate videos. So we may have breaks at the end of each segment and then a whole new video following it. This is the chart for Bryan Kohberger. Now, understand we don't actually have a time of birth for him. I am thinking he is Capricorn rising because with all this Scorpio in his chart and the moon most likely in Cancer, I'm thinking that he has to be Capricorn rising because otherwise he would retain a lot more water. We know he used to be big as a kid, but that's not enough. And the Capricorn rising makes sense with somebody who is in a graduate school program, so a PhD program, studying criminal justice or criminology, criminal sciences, and the Capricorn rising, and with a build on the face, everything makes sense. It would be Capricorn rising. And also that's going to put Pluto, transiting Pluto, right there on the ascendant, which would make all kinds of sense because, boy, Pluto's really tearing through his life right now, isn't it? Okay. So the first thing I just want to say is if you guys start getting nuts and you start thinking about all this Scorpio, right? Like, ooh, Scorpio. Just remember Zana and Ethan Chapin. Zana and Ethan also had like quadruple Scorpio planets. So let's not get too carried away with our assumptions about Scorpios. Now, with Bryan, I'm not going to get too much into his natal chart, but I will say with a Sun, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio, what you're going to get is somebody who is incredibly self-possessed and very, very disciplined. So willpower is an understatement when you're dealing with this much Scorpio in the chart. Ethan had it, Zana had it, and of course, Bryan has it, right? Now, Bryan and Zana both have Venus retrograde in Scorpio, interestingly enough. And that makes them both very, very sensitive, and certainly they have their own demons that they have to work through. It's just, Venus retrograde is difficult enough. Venus retrograde in Scorpio is doubly difficult because the world does not make it easy for you. With a Sun, Pluto, Jupiter conjunction in Scorpio, this is somebody who is destined to be well known or famous, and he certainly is now. And remember, this is not a confirmation of guilt or innocence, because either way, guilty or innocent, everybody knows who he is now, and his name will not be forgotten. He carries, I thought this was interesting, so he carries a grand shrine in water, right? And like Zana, right? Very, very good people, which is not the reports we're getting. But, all these Johnny-come-lately, suddenly everyone's got a story, right? Very, very good at reading people, very sensitive. Now, with Saturn in Pisces and Venus retrograde in Scorpio and that moon in Cancer, this would have made him much more cautious, emotionally cautious around people, and also much more easily hurt. And honestly, whenever you see Saturn, there's the potential for being a scapegoat. Saturn in Pisces is absolutely one of many, but one of the symbols for being a scapegoat. So, and we're certainly seeing that. We've heard stories about him growing up, and that was part of that problem too. So, and he has Mars in Leo, and Mars is squaring all the Scorpio planets. There's tremendous drive and ambition in this person, and whatever they do, they want to do big, huge, large. So again, getting a degree or just being a police officer would never have been enough. Getting a doctorate in criminal sciences still would not have been enough. This is somebody who would have gone on to do very, very specific, very obscure, like elite levels of research into things, right? Like there would have literally been no end to the heights with which he would have pursued in terms of excellence in whatever he did. So, unfortunately that's all over now, but You know, this is somebody who's driven by ambition and a desire to do more, driven by a need for excellence above and beyond the ordinary. So there is that. Now, could that make him the criminal mastermind? Sure, of course, could. But, you know, at the same time, like if you had a choice between, I don't know, you know, being like a murderer or something else, I mean, I would think something else would be better. But I'm not a murderer, so what do I know? Who knows? Okay, so anyway, this is his natal chart. And the thing that I want to point out that I thought was very, very important, right? Remember that Mars in Gemini, that the murder, because Mars rules knives, right? So Mars in the murder chart is extremely important, and it's connected to every single chart of the victims. But do we see it here with him? No, there's no connection. There's no connection between Mars and the murder chart to anything in his chart. We see connections from Mars to everybody else's chart except his, which is why this is all very suspect to me, because it should be here. He is part of this event. The heavens record these events. This connection should also be in his chart, and it's not. The closest thing we have is a sextile to his natal Mars, which is not something that, because Mars is your temper and your rage or anger, right? And a sextile is not something that pushes you to an explosive, violent, destructive expression of anger. That's not what a Mars-Mars sextile does. If anything, Mars-Mars sextile is going to make you a little more restless, like a little more energetic, need to get out of the house a little bit more social, and that's about it. It's not going to drive you to like furious explosions of rage. So that was concerning. The other thing I just want to point out when it's looking at a chart, this right here. Now remember, Zana took this too. There was an eclipse back in October. Yes, back in October that kicked off this Venus at 2 Scorpio, and the Uranus, the eclipse in Uranus that kicked off the murder a week before was at 16 Taurus, and that would have been right here. And that pulls in his natal Mercury. Now, also remember, we don't have a time of birth, so we don't know what house this Mercury is falling in. But certainly with this eclipse activating his Mercury, it's definitely pulling in some aspect of his life in a lot of ways. But, you know, also too, Mercury rules siblings and neighbors and people that we know on the street sort of stuff. So there's, and also students. So there is that, but you know, the struggle that we have right now with this particular eclipse is, again, we don't know where Mercury falls in his chart, so we have no idea what this involves. But you know, Mercury does rule students, so I'm wondering now if the person who has helped create the situation, if it's not him, if this person is in fact somebody who has been under his tutelage, or you know, somebody that he is what is the word I'm looking for? Tutored. Somebody who's tutored at some point if they weren't actually a student, right? There's some food for thought. Okay, so this is the synastry between Bryan, Ethan, and Zana. There's 8 years difference between them, so, and they're at college. There's really no reason for them to interact with each other. I mean, you know, it's almost 10 years between them. It's just a weird, at those ages, it's just weird to spend time with people who are that far from you in your age group. Now, note that they all of them have a heavy emphasis in Scorpio, right? So with him, we've got Sun, Pluto, Jupiter, and Mercury and Venus in Scorpio. With Zana, who is the middle chart, we have Sun, Mercury, and Venus. Right? And then, of course, with Ethan, we've got Sun, Venus. So there's a heavy Scorpio influence in all the charts, but especially Bryan and Zana. Other than that, we don't have really, I don't know how to tell you guys this, we don't really have a lot of hard aspects. If anything, what we have is the quincunx. We have a square from their Jupiter, from Zana and Ethan's Jupiter, to Bryan's Scorpio planet. So at best or at worst, the two of them as a couple and or individually would have definitely raised his insecurities. So even if he wanted to be more comfortable with them, there would have been not jealousy, but just this constant reminder, something about them and their Jupiter and Leo would have constantly reminded him of the deficits or the insecurities he has about himself, right? And that's it. No, typically when you have really disagreeable relationships with people, you want to see, or you will see, I should say, very hard aspects. Now we do have that here because his Mars, it's kind of gray. I don't know. His Mars is at 23 Leo, and it is opposing their mutual Uranus in 24 Aquarius. Now, I have to point out that Uranus is a generational planet, right? So every person born in their, what is going on? Oh my God, every person born in their generation will have Uranus in Aquarius, and his Mars is going to oppose all of them. So for every person he's dealing with that he has about 8 years of difference with, it's going to have the same uncomfortable feeling between them, right? So he's not going to see them as very reliable, and they're just going to see him as, you know, overbearing. So I don't know that his Mars opposing their Uranus has that much significance. I would like to see more personal planets involved. And the closest thing we have to a personal planet or a more exact or close sort of thing is right here, where his Mars makes a sextile to their Saturn, and that's not a bad aspect. It's actually very supportive. So he would have actually gotten along better with them, with those two, than he does with many of the people in their age group. So now this brings us to the charts between Bryan, Kaylee, and Madison, right? Now remember, Kaylee and Madison are practically identical twins, not only in physical appearance, but also in their charts. There's very, very few differences between them. So when we look at those two, yellow this time. I do not know what's going on with my thing. So they've got this heavy emphasis of Gemini down here, right? And he is very much heavily Scorpio. Well, this is a quincunx aspect. It's literally, you're kind of operating in each other's blind spot. You don't really have a lot of use for each other. So right there, there's no relationship. There's very little interest in each other. There's not a lot of use for each other. They don't understand each other. They don't fit well together. When you have big quincunxes or inconjuncts between your chart and somebody else, it's a weird feeling. Like you might feel like you should know them or you should be doing something for them, like paying off like some type of spiritual debt or something. But other than like a minor annoying interest, there's not a lot there to make relationships work. And more important, there's no compelling sort of interest in each other. There's no real deep point of fascination between people when there's an inconjunct. And literally, this is the only aspect I can find between them. Because the other handful of aspects I can find are well, I mean, they're either supportive or you've got that single one that is generational with everybody in their age group. So if we look at just that, because remember, this is the same aspect we had with Ethan and Zana, right? Does his Mars make any supportive aspects to the girl's chart, right? Or more hard aspects? Well, his Mars is in, yeah, he's the middle one. They both carry Mars out here. His Mars is in Leo, and it's trining their Mars and Saturn, right? So these are people who get along well when they do get along. There's nothing antagonistic between them. Mars trines are great to have because you get each other in ways that make it easy to go get stuff done, right? It's not antagonistic or competitive or obstructive with each other. So I'm telling you, I'm not seeing these connections between the charts. No, before I do this, I just want to say the Between the time I set this up, this whole series of photographs and stuff up, and now, just yesterday, the affidavit of probable cause was released, and this Dylan, what's her face? God, what is her name? Dylan, the roommate Dylan. I don't have her name written down. She has come up, and her testimony was released, or at least a statement she gave to police officers, which of course raises all kinds of questions. And now, looking at her her named asteroid in the charts, like I'm wondering what Dylan's relationship is here, because it looks specifically like Dylan, Zana, and Bryan, not Bryan, Dylan, Zana, and Ethan, but definitely Dylan and Zana. Not only have a relationship with each other, so they're friends with each other, but they are instrumental or a catalyst. Ethan too. Ethan, Zana, and Dylan are a catalyst in this event transpiring. Now remember, we're all going out on a limb and we're speculating here because we've never done murder charts before. But if I'm reading this correctly, that's what it looks like to me. So I don't think that Maddie and Kaylee. Actually, I don't think Maddie was an issue. So I don't know. I mean, it looks like if it was a Dylan issue, it's something with Dylan and Kaylee where this problem originated, or where this problem is coming from. But with Kaylee and Maddie, they look so much alike. It would be very hard to tell them apart if you were in some kind of berserker frenzy and stabbing people. I mean, literally, you can barely tell these two apart. So, anyway, okay, so back to the chart. All right, so the inside of the chart, this is the chart of the murder. Now the time on here is off. I didn't fix that, but the planets are the same, so we're good with that. And of course, Bryan's chart is on the outside. So we're looking for any kind of connections between the murder chart and Bryan's chart that would make sense. And we're not really seeing it. So here in the murder chart, we've got Sun, Mercury, and Venus all lined up in Scorpio. Now, clearly, it is here where Bryan's Scorpio planets are. But remember, Zana and Ethan also carry Scorpio planets in the same degrees. So they're all here getting walloped by this stellium, right? And Mars is instrumental in this chart. We know Mars is key in this chart, right? And Mars hits every single one of their charts. It hits Kaylee's, it hits Maddie's, it hits Zana, it hits Ethan, right? So literally Mars connects all four of these charts. So we should find a connection here with Bryan's if he was actually there, you would think, in theory, right? Nothing. There's absolutely nothing. The closest we have, because this is a quincunx, this is a quincunx, you know, that's a square, which doesn't mean anything. And that's okay, the murder, I'm sorry. So Mars is going to quincunx here, quincunx here, and it's going to sextile here. So literally, there are no hard aspects from the murder chart and that Mars to Bryan's chart, except two quincunxes, if we even use those, right? Because the only other aspect it makes is a sextile to Mars, which is not a rage-producing aspect. When you have a Mars sextile Mars aspect happening, you're not angry. Things are working for you. You're feeling energetic, like you want to go get something done or whatever, but it's not, other than slight agitation because you don't know what to do with yourself, this is not a frustrated, rageful, angry aspect. So again, I'm not seeing it. And all this makes me a little suspect about what's really going on with this case and who actually murdered these kids. And just to make sure you understand what I'm talking about, the next segment I'm going to do is a separate series of charts about a murderer who murdered, and these are complete strangers, but he literally murdered these people with a knife, right? Did not know them from Adam. But even being complete strangers, what you're going to see is there are literally direct connections between the charts, right? So when people come into our lives and they change our lives, right? And death is definitely changing your life. There will be a connection, direct connections between chart, and usually multiple connections. So I'm not seeing that between Bryan's chart and these other charts, and I'm certainly not seeing it with a murder chart or the event and Bryan's chart. So there's something smells a little fishy in Denmark. Okay, so This is the this is the murder chart. This is the murder chart, give or take, right? So what we know about the day and time of this murder chart, well, the first thing, again, we've got this grand shrine, right? So whatever the intended event was would have been successful. And so far it appears to be, because whoever committed this murder apparently looks like they've just gotten away with it. Mars is the most important part or planet in this chart, and the only hard aspect we can find is a square to Jupiter and Neptune. Not completely sure what to make of that. We're going to hold that thought. The moon is opposing Pluto for this event. This was definitely an act of revenge. This was revenge, pure cold revenge. And one of the things we're looking at is, again, right, all these Scorpio planets connected with everybody's chart except Bryan's. Bryan does not have any connections in here. And all these connections, this heavy Scorpio at the time of the event, all connects with all the kids' charts. And we know for a fact they were there because they couldn't leave. And here's the eclipse. This was the eclipse that set it off. Right? Got them all. Got them all. Okay, so I'm thinking that Dylan, and now more than ever, I think Dylan knows a lot more than she's leading us to believe. I think that I don't understand why the police did not investigate her further. There's a whole lot of questions about the handling of this and the handling of those two survivors that are really, really suspect. So in the next video, what I'm going to do, and you can look this chart up, you can look this case up while we're waiting. There's a case, a gentleman by the name of Cary Stayner, who murdered a Carol Sund, Silvina Peloso, Julie Sund, and a Jaquita Mack back in 1997, I think. Horrible, horrific murders, and he has a horrible, horrible life story. So it will be an interesting video when we talk about murders and murder charts and murderers and connections between murderers and victims. Now, this is only one chart I just happened to pull up randomly, got lucky and found a perfect case example. But, you know, as with all things, we want to see multiple examples to prove a rule. So we're just using this as a potential example of what's going on. So all of this is to say that this story with Mr. Bryan is not over, Mr. Kohberger, it's not over. And I don't see any connections, any meaningful connections that make sense between him, the victims, or the events, which in this case was the murder. So I'm a little suspect about what's going on. I unfortunately cannot tell you the same about Dylan or what's her face, the other girl, because I can't find her birth information online anywhere. So if you guys can find your date of birth and place of birth, like send it to me so we can set up their charts against the murder chart. And see what's going on with them. So that's it. Hope you enjoyed this a little bit. I'm sorry I didn't spend more time on it, but we got to keep this stuff shorter. We're going to be here for 5 hours. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section below. If you'd like me to elaborate more on anything in these charts, please let me know, and we'll set up a special separate video just for that, if I have time. Okay, this has been Miss Jenny with Primal Girl Wellness and Down Earth Astrology, and we are doing the connections between the murder chart and the accused murderer and the victims in the Idaho 4 case. Okay, so I want to close this video with a little intro to the final video for this this series. So I did some research and I got lucky, really lucky. I found a chart for a similar crime where a man knifed some people to death. Not, well, I mean, I suppose he could be considered a serial killer because he did it more than once over time, which is the definition of a serial killer, but also maybe a mass murderer because the initial kill was 3 complete strangers. So he is a fascinating character. He is well worth a video study all on his own. His name is Cary Stayner. I'll put the information in the description box for you so you can look him up. Fascinating, fascinating, and tragic life story. So, Carrie Stainer, we are lucky enough to have the dates of birth for both Carrie Stainer, for all of Carrie Stainer, the murderer, and his victims, Julie Sund, her daughter, um, I'm sorry, Carol Sund, her daughter, Julie Sund, and also a young woman he murdered a couple years later, completely unrelated, uh, a Joy Armstrong. Now, there is one victim that we do not have the date of birth for, and it is a young woman from Argentina who happened to be with the mother and daughter, Carol and Julie Sund, at the time of the murder. But her birth information is not available online, so I wasn't able to do anything with that. The and I'm doing this because I want to show you guys what I'm talking about. Now, typically and clearly, we need multiple cases to prove a rule. You can't just go on one thing and say that's the rule for everything, right? But remember what I'm saying to you, even in death, right, with complete strangers, these women died at the hands of a complete stranger. They had no relationship to him otherwise. Never saw him before until it was time for them, to exit this world. And when you look at their charts, across the charts between him and the victims, there are direct and exact connections between his planets and theirs, and specific ones. Which is why I'm saying that in the event that somebody comes in your life and they change your life, you're definitely going to see connections between the charts, and probably multiple ones. In this case, with a Stainard and these unfortunate victims of his, the connections are there across the charts, right? All of them, except for the one that we can't find, so we don't know. Which is why I'm saying that it's a little suspect that Bryan Kohberger has almost no connections to the charts of these 4 victims at Idaho University. And the few that I am finding are really pleasant, supportive aspects, not bad ones. So everything's a little hinky from this side. But again, that's why we have science and law and the legal process, because just like the legal process protects us from, these pitchfork and torches savages, that are ready to hang anybody because they're convenient and they need to make somebody the scapegoat for a crime. The legal process allows cool heads to prevail, and in its best application, gives us a chance to prove innocence or guilt. Innocent until proven guilty. So there's that. And, we have investigators and we have science and all of these things to help establish what is and isn't fact in the course of something that happened in the shadows, where there are no witnesses, or there are no witnesses left. So, anything we get, whether it's through psychics or TikTok tarot card readers or even astrologers, this is not proof or confirmation of guilt or innocence. And it should not be. This should not be the measure and standard that we use to solve crimes. This can be a helpful tool, just like a compass is a helpful tool, but it won't give you a GPS address, right? This can be a helpful tool, but we have to use all of the solid evidence-based tools, real evidence-based tools, science, legal process, available to us to actually establish these things. So just like a good detective and a good legal team is never going to convict and assume guilt based on opinion or a couple of loose, circumstantial, cough, cough, Moscow, circumstantial pieces of evidence. There has to be a tremendous amount of establishment of likely probable fact before we assume that somebody's guilty, especially if something so horrendous as taking a life. So what we're doing is for our own benefit and for learning astrology, and also to establish that everything we're doing down here is recorded up there. There's a record of it up there. Nobody gets away with anything. It's on record. So when we're not seeing what should be clear and obvious connections between the chart of a assumed or suspected murderer and victims, something's not right. Something's not right. I'm just saying. And when we can see those connections between charts, between complete strangers, we should definitely see it between people who've probably run into each other or had some kind of relationship with each other, even casually, at some point before. So that will be the next and last of this series of videos. So, and let's see what happens with this case with Bryan Kohberger and the Idaho 4, and let's hope that they get the correct guilty party and we get this laid to rest.